What if one executive order could change the price of your medicine, the future of your job, and even the balance of global power? That is exactly what has happened. On August 27, 2025, President Donald Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Indian imports, the steepest among Asian economies. This unprecedented trade war between the United States and India is no longer just a story about politics. It's about how the world's largest democracies have entered a dangerous standoff with ripple effects from Washington to New Delhi and far beyond. This is not speculation. These tariffs doubled the earlier 25% duty announced in early August, leaving a staggering 50% barrier on more than half of India's $87 billion annual exports to the United States. That includes clothing, jewelry, footwear, chemicals, furniture, and even critical pharmaceutical supplies. In a single move, Trump targeted one of America's fastest-growing trade partners and one of the most vital suppliers of affordable medicine. The official justification was India's expanding purchases of discounted Russian oil, which by mid-2025 made up more than a third of its total energy imports. The Trump administration framed it bluntly. India is bankrolling Russia's war machine, and if New Delhi defies Washington, it will pay the price. But critics argue the decision is less about oil and more about Washington's fear of India's growing role in the BRICS bloc and the group's push for trade outside the U.S. dollar. The backstory is critical here. For years, the United States has complained about a $44 billion goods trade deficit with India, pointing to India's own protective tariffs on agriculture and dairy. But Washington also relied on New Delhi as a partner in the Quad alliance to counterbalance China. The tariffs put decades of trust at risk. Negotiations collapsed after 5 rounds of talks, with Indian officials accusing Washington of hypocrisy, since both Europe and China buy far more Russian energy without facing penalties. The impact inside the United States was immediate. The Tax Foundation estimates the tariffs will cost the average middle-class family an extra $1,300 this year. 40% of America's generic drugs come from India, valued at more than $10.5 billion annually. With the new duties, pharmacies are reporting shortages, and prices have surged by 35%. Hospitals in Boston and Philadelphia are already rationing critical medications, and the American Pharmacists Association warns the system cannot switch suppliers overnight. For families, these numbers translate into painful choices. In Houston, pharmacy technician Janelle Grimes told CBS News her son's asthma inhaler jumped from $45 to $70 overnight, forcing her to skip her own heart medication. In rural Iowa, soybean farmer Tom Reynolds lost nearly $400,000 after India canceled contracts and shifted purchases to Brazil. And in Silicon Valley, companies dependent on India's IT services now face 20% higher rates, raising costs by $12 billion and delaying product launches. The consequences are not confined to households. On Wall Street, the Dow fell 1,200 points in early August, and consumer confidence is now at a 15-year low. Across the Midwest, farmers warn that whole towns could collapse under the weight of falling grain prices, which are already down 12%. And in California, Indian-American businesses in places like Little India are watching decades-old family stores struggle to survive as import duties crush profit margins. India's response has been equally forceful. Prime Minister Narendra Modi vowed in Parliament that India will not yield to foreign pressure. His government rolled out $5 billion in export subsidies, cut GST on key goods, and redirected shipments to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Indian jewelers are expanding in Saudi Arabia. Textile exporters are moving to EU markets. And most importantly, India has deepened trade with BRICS partners using rupees and yuan instead of dollars. The symbolism matters. At the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, Modi was photographed embracing Vladimir Putin, sending a clear message: India is not backing down. At the same time, Indian officials paused arms purchases from the U.S., a warning shot that could weaken defense ties just as Washington hoped to tighten alliances in Asia. In Washington, the backlash is growing. Health and Human Services scrambled to allocate $5 billion for pharmaceutical reshoring in Texas and Michigan, but experts say it will take 5 to 7 years to build capacity. Farmers are demanding bailouts, while lawmakers like Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa call the tariffs a stunt that sacrifices the heartland. Tech firms have warned the White House of job losses and global competitiveness slipping away. Experts are divided, but their warnings are stark. Former U.S. Ambassador to India Kenneth Jester said the tariffs risk unraveling decades of goodwill. Jeffrey Sachs described India's pivot as pragmatic and isolating U.S. influence, while Larry Summers called the policy catastrophic for American consumers. The University of Michigan now reports that 64% of Americans feel worse off since the tariffs began. For Indian American communities, the tariffs hit deeper than economics. In Artesia, California, shop owners are closing stores that once served as cultural lifelines. Festival outfits, spices, and traditional goods are suddenly unaffordable. One store owner paid $62,000 in duties on a single shipment of bridal dresses. Restaurants face skyrocketing costs for authentic ingredients. Families now question if they can sustain traditions like Diwali celebrations under these pressures. On the ground in India, Surat's textile mills, once buzzing with activity, are running at half capacity. Nearly 45 million workers tied to the garment industry face reduced hours and looming unemployment. Economists project the tariffs could shave half a percentage point off India's GDP growth. For a country positioning itself as the world's fastest-growing major economy, that's a significant blow. The irony is hard to ignore. The tariffs meant to protect American jobs are inflating consumer prices, disrupting supply chains, and inviting retaliation. Farmers lose markets. Tech firms lose clients. Hospitals lose medicine. Meanwhile, India is diversifying exports and strengthening ties with Russia and China, accelerating the multipolar order Washington fears most. All eyes are now on the next round of potential talks. Trump has hinted at a reset, but at the same time he has pressed European allies to double down with their own tariffs on Indian goods, a demand that has been met with silence. India, meanwhile, is rallying BRICS nations to reduce reliance on the dollar, a move that could fundamentally reshape global trade. The next 48 hours will be critical as Washington weighs whether to escalate or seek compromise. The stakes are enormous. For American families, it's the price of medicine and groceries. For Indian exporters, it's millions of jobs. For global markets, it's a test of whether trade wars can destabilize alliances and accelerate the rise of a multipolar world. This story is not just about economics. It's about power, sovereignty, and the fragile trust that underpins international order. What happens next will define the future of U.S.-India relations and set the tone for how the world navigates great power competition in the years ahead.